Welcome everyone to the Procurement Audit training organized by the USAID Short-Term Assistance to Improve Public Financial Management Reform Project, STAIR project, in collaboration with the Department of Management Audit of Ministry of Finance. To start this workshop, may I cordially invite Ms. S.A. Chandrika Kulathilaka, the Director General of Department of Management Audit of Ministry of Finance, to conduct the opening remarks.
Mr. Tom, Chamit, and other staff of the USAID, dear participants, it gives me great pleasure in welcoming you all to third workshop jointly organized by USAID Project and Management Audit Department. With the experience of successful workshops organized by them, you are about to gain knowledge about another familiar subject. On behalf of the President, Secretariat and Finance Ministry, again thank USAID for encouraging our department and kind support for this workshop. At the same time, I must thank all secretaries, head of department for giving this opportunity to you all come to this workshop. I am sure that you will earn good knowledge after completion the workshop too. I welcome you all once again to the workshop and hope you all have great time ahead. Thank you.
We just got done talking a couple minutes ago about how important procurement auditing is, or just procurement in general is to the government. Why don't we do an overview of the seminar? If everybody got the material, we're going to do about, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 modules. We'll do 8 modules over the course of 3 days. Today's our first day, tomorrow will be our second day, and then Thursday is going to be our final day. Today we're going to talk about procurement management, documentation, Incoterms. The United Nations has actually some laws, model laws involved in procurement. We'll also look at payment terms and letters of credit. So basically today's a background day. We want to establish a background. We want to get some basic knowledge about procurement. I don't know how many people have worked in procurement or how many people have audited procurement. With the sessions today, with the modules today, we want to get that basic knowledge. Tomorrow we'll talk about auditing of procurement. And in that regard, Thomas in the project actually prepared an audit manual which is available on the share drive to download. So this manual, I have one copy here. We could leave it and you could look through it later. If we look here at day 3, maybe we should jump ahead to day 3, but if it's public investment management, we're going to talk a little bit about how the budget and policy development actually rolls out into building highways or building airports or building railroads. So you could look into that. I find it kind of interesting because a lot of donors actually put money and say we're going to build hospitals. Well, how does that actually fit into the national plan? As the internal audit department, we have to here demonstrate competency, continuous improvement, and insightful and proactive in future. And the insightful and proactive, future-orientated focus is exactly why we have the room here today with 100 people. You're actually being very proactive in trying to learn. And we'll look here at attribute standards. Attribute standards are proficiency. Internal auditors must possess the knowledge, skills, and other competencies. So internal auditors must possess the knowledge, skills, and other competencies needed to perform their individual responsibilities. Here, continual professional development, and this happens to do with our department. Internal auditors must enhance their competencies through CPE, continual professional development. So these are we're actually demonstrating today, in the next 3 days, why are we doing what we're doing? We're doing it because of these 2 standards. Okay. So what is procurement? Procurement is the process of, this is a definition of procurement. There's different ways. It's not only tendering, competitive bidding, there's PPP. So we'll look at some of those. Okay, so that's the introduction. All right, and what we want to do here is we want to learn about how procurement occurs, annual procurement plans, different types of contracts, different inputs and different outputs. Because if you're going to audit it, you should really know about what it is, how does this actually function on a real-time basis. So, gain an understanding of requests for proposals, statement of work, specifications, procurement planning, procurement plan management. Okay, it's interesting. One of the activities that comes into concern is development of a procurement planning is a task that is quite complex, and it goes into the annual budget. It has impact on cash management. It has impact on availability of resources. It has an impact on delivery of services. Okay, it was mentioned at one of our sessions about having, if they purchase medicine, is the medicine that's available to the citizens, is it of high quality? Is it the correct medicine? Do they have if there's any kind of national emergency, how does the procurement system actually help that? Expected goals and targets of public organizations should align with. Why do people pay I pay taxes to the government. The government's supposed to take my tax money and they're supposed to provide services. Okay, that's how it works. And this happens currently it's a big theme, again, at least with the World Bank, the projects that I'm involved in now, they're always talking about the fiduciary responsibility of the local government, of the mayor, of the president, of the minister, of the government officer. Why don't we hear procurement environment in Sri Lanka? Well, yeah, okay, but if we look at this, it's interesting. I think what I saw when I noticed this constitutional provisions, who do they protect? They protect the citizens, right? This is the citizens, the citizens here at the top, constitutional, Parliament, Auditor General, accountability, this is for the citizens. Okay, and the civil law, what does that protect? It protects the transaction. These things here protect the buyer, this government procurement guidelines and best practices. Make sure that the buyer is compliant with the needs. The institutional framework here, Department of Public Finance, best practices. And we're going to find out when we look tomorrow, when we look at the auditing of procurement, we're going to find out that it's very much involved in both compliance and performance auditing. It's a mix between compliance and performance auditing. The collaborative effort, I think the important thing here to say that it's good judgment and critical thinking. Okay, procurement contracting is very much a legal activity, making sure the contracts are all correct, the terms and conditions, terms of references. And if there's a standard, there's a rule of thumb, there's a standard, 20, 40, 40. 20% of your time should be invested in looking for products, rationalizing your procurement need, 20, 40, and 40. Yeah, 20% is defined looking, 40% would be defined in, or defining your need, 20%, 40% in developing the contract, looking for the goods and services, and 40% involved in actual contract fulfillment. 20% in defining your need, 40% in obtaining the services. Okay, and we'll look through each one of these when there's different types and different purchases, small purchases, direct purchases, sole source contracts, and emergency purchase. And each one of these has to be addressed in a different manner. There's some basic principles that occur for each one, but there's also some different rules and regulations, okay? So who are the key players? If you're, again, in the audit activity, who would you actually be talking to? You'd be talking to, in developing a procurement plan, it's the head of the department. So who would be the most important one in the group? Who's the most important people to talk to about procurement auditing?
Yeah, first of all, we have to check this quality of the product and service received through the procurement. Therefore, we have to check from the people who need and who using this product.
What are they concerned about? Each one of these people is concerned about each one of these activities. Yes, yes, in some way or shape or form. Benefits of procurement planning. Procurement planning here, what does it say here? It says here that there's the procurement plan is like, it's important because what? Realistic budgeting, correct? Enhances teamwork, value for money, reduces transaction costs. The procurement planning reduces transaction costs, and it actually offers a performance measurement. Okay, levels of procurement planning. Multiple annual plan, more than 1 year, short period. So there's different types of procurement plans. We have here contents, detailed order of priority. Procurement value, source of funding, types of procurement, what's in the procurement plan? The procurement plan should have here priority, A, B, C. What do we need first, second, third? Priority. Method here, the method required. Method of procurement for each requirement or group. So the method of procurement, you may have different methods. You could have a direct procurement, you could have sole source, you could have bidding. Who does a procurement plan?
Yes. Preparation of procurement plan is really the collaborative effort with each and every division, but basically it's prepared by the procurement unit in consultation with the finance department.
Steps that determine the work plan and the programs. This comes into program budgeting. Work plans, the purpose and the timing of the procurement. What is the purpose and the timing here? In forecasting here, we could either forecast based on some sort of bill of materials, so we know exactly what what goes into a particular product or project. So when we write, and we'll look more in detail about requirements, but there's requirements could either be a technical or a functional requirement. Technical or functional requirement. Okay, and we're going to look in more detail. We'll look actually deep into how to write requirements, how to write specifications, how to write statements of work. Okay, and as we discussed here, involve and consult key stakeholders, carry out a market research, and make clear specifications, terms of reference, and statements of work, okay? But each one of these particular steps, you can actually work and audit. You could audit. Have they actually done that? Is there documentation that they've consulted with the stakeholders? Okay, check past records, confirm the likely timing of the procurement. Okay, here what we're talking about is here prioritize the procurement requirements is important. What do we need to do first, second, third? And there's different parties, different people, different departments involved in each step. Yeah, the top management here and the processes would be defined by the procurement unit. All right, well, so those are basic here. We've gone through the various steps. Why don't we get more into the detail? Obtain the approval, prepare, circulate, review, and update. So these are the steps. There's about 25 steps of procurement plan. Each one of these can be involved in an audit activity. How would it review and update the procurement plan? How often is it reviewed? How often is it updated? Who updates it, okay? Okay, and this comes into the 20-40-40. Contract administration, contract closeout. We're going to look more in detail at each one of these, but this is where basically 80% of the activity is involved. Procurement planning, solicitation planning, contract award, contract completion, contract administration, contract closeout. There's a formal closeout to the contract. So if we look at how the process flows, all right, here now we're going to get more into the detail. Input procurement planning input, scope statement, a scope statement. product description, market conditions, other planning, other outputs, constraints, assumptions. Again, you could write an audit program. This is the inputs. What do I need? I need a scope statement. I need a product description. I need resources. Scope statement describes the project boundaries, project needs, and project strategy. So you come in and you want to see, what is your scope statement? So if you come in as an auditor, you want to look at the scope statement. Does it actually describe what the boundaries are? What kind of information is there? What does the project need? Where's the project going? Okay, so these are things that an auditor would look for. Product description provides about the technical issues and concerns, broader than the statement of work because it describes the end product. Okay, the end. Market conditions here, what products are available, from whom, under what conditions, and other planning input. What the identify risks, staffing, cash flow, quality, schedules. Okay, so for each one of these things here, constraints, factors, availability, assumptions. Make sure that there's documentation. Factors that limit the buyer's options. One of the most common is funds availability. So how is there a budget reference number? Is there some kind of funding? Expert judgment here. Expert judgment comes from here. It comes from other units within the organization. Make or buy analysis here used to determine whether a particular can be done inside the organization. Maybe we have some examples of in the case studies where make or buy can we do this internally, or do we have to go outside the organization? Should include here direct and indirect costs. Here is ABC analysis, always better control. 10%, 20%, 70%. ABC analysis is used regularly. This is vital, essential, desirable. This is one thing that you also want to see in a procurement plan. It's a subjective analysis. Okay, basically here we want to go through and we want to see what is vital, what's essential, what's desirable, what do I need, what do I absolutely need. It's essential. It's vital, I have to have it. Essential is a very important. Desirable is I'd like to have it. It's a subjective analysis. Desirable, shortage will not adversely affect but may be using more resources. Vital, shortage cannot be tolerated. Well, look at this here, vital. In there here, you could actually compare the two, which I find interesting. You do a matrix here of ABC analysis and VED analysis in category needs close monitoring, moderate monitoring, no need for control. These particular tools can be applied in to any kind of activity, okay? VED and ABC. So you categorize activity procurement items according to A, B, C, and then you cross them between vital, essential, and desirable. Okay, here, procurement management plan should describe how procurements are processed from solicitation through a contract closeout. Statement of work, and we're going to look more at statement of work because I think that's very important. Describes the procurement items in sufficient detail to allow prospective sellers to determine if they are capable of providing the item. Okay, and you can audit the statement of work, and you could audit the procurement plan. Scope of work, a statement, or scope of work, statement of work, scope of work, it's the same. Scope of work describes the exact work to be done. Well, yeah, the statement is the larger, and the scope is we'll see it here in detail. Statement has these items. Scope, location, period of performance, when is this to start, when it's to end, work hours, number of hours that can be billed, and the delivery schedule. The applicable standards we talked about here. What are the standards we applied? One of them was the internal audit, 1210, whatever it was, performance standard. So we applied these standards, specific standards relative to the performance of the work. So acceptance criteria, who actually reviews the work? Is it a committee? Is a specification? A specification is a little bit different. Is it different between statement of work and specification? A job specification here is, we'll go through each one of these steps and then we'll come back and look at what a specification is. Range of objectives, specifications. We're going to build a new school in Ratnapura. We're going to build a new school. Okay, so here, a specification is different from a statement of work. Scope and range of objective, definition of terms. Specific definition of terms could be a building, a classroom comprises 10 meters by 30 meters or 20 meters by 30 meters, something of that nature. What's he doing, actually? What's more important, what he's doing? He's writing something in stone. Great, exactly. Why do we pick this particular picture? Because the specifications are written in stone. What does it mean when you write something in stone? Contents list, reason for the specification, introduction, general contents of a specification, title, designation number, history. Specifications are used more for material objects, building the port or building an airport or building a road. Engineering specifications. Principles of specification writing, number one, should whenever be possible be open, making requirements flexible and encouraging competition. Okay, we get back to the statement of work. Statement of work can certainly be revised during the process, particularly when it goes into cost efficiencies, more efficient, less costs. Each individual requires a separate statement of work. Each individual procurement item requires a separate statement of work. Multiple products may be grouped as one procurement item onto a single statement of work. You find this often when you do, if you're installing an IT system or a computer system. So if you remember, we had our flow chart. We had also, the next stage would be solicitation, to plan the solicitation. So the inputs to the solicitation planning are the outputs of the procurement planning. So it's the plan, the statement of work, other planning information. Output from procurement planning goes to input for solicitation planning. Okay, and there's two terms, RFP and RFQ, request for quotation and request for proposal. And let's do the request for a quote. A quote is basically here, it's a standard, I want a quote on video cameras, so we know what kind of video camera there is. Okay, when you go out in the field and you look at what is the RFP? The RFP should have what? It's got to have, or it should have, these seven items. The purpose, the organization background, hardware, software environment. If we look at D here, required contents of vendor response to the RFP. You'd actually want each vendor, and we'll see later on when we do a bid analysis, you want them to present information in a standard format. All right, so inputs, outputs, procurement documentation, evaluation criteria, and then actually within the solicitation, you may actually have to update your statement of work. In this here, I believe Sri Lanka, you have standard forms, whereas you do have standard bidding forms. All this stuff is available, right? We have this available. I mean, where it comes into here is the expert judgment. The judgment, the people analyzing, measuring, and evaluating. That's where it's important in solicitation planning. All right, a bid and quote. Proposal is generally when other considerations such as technical skills are important. A proposal actually, again, it solves problems. It's a proposal says what would our approach be? What's our technical approach to solve a particular issue? A bid and quote, as I say, we talked about the issue of buying either computers or cameras. It's a specific item, specific standard use. What's the bid, what's the quote? So there's an invitation for bid, there's a request for proposal, a request for quotation, invitation for negotiation, And there's also contractor responses. These are different types of documents that are involved in the solicitation process. Evaluation outputs, okay, we had inputs, outputs. So the outputs is any kind of modification identified during the solicitation. So it could be, in fact, that, yeah, that a supplier indicates that you forgot to take into account, you know, so and so many meters of wire. You said you didn't account for particular items. You go back and you adjust your statement of work. And then also here's score and rating of proposal. We'll look at that in more detail in a minute, but here is scored rating. And there's various criteria that you would score a project. Okay, solicitation. So we went from planning the solicitation to actually getting engaged in the solicitation. The solicitation here, you may have qualified vendors, you may have a bidders conference, you have certain advertising. Solicitation involves obtaining responses, inputs, procurement document, qualified, relevant past experience in other characteristics. Yeah, we talked, I think you have a blacklist here. Is there a blacklist in the procurement area? Procurement documents be sent to some or all the prospective sellers. So this qualified sellers list is part of the solicitation process. How good is the qualified sellers list? There's a qualified vendor list. Okay, and you'll find this often, but all potential sellers must remain on equal standing during this process. What does that mean? I mean, if we think back about, what do we say, specifications, right? We said specifications. What do we say about the 500cc engine? Ensure all prospective have a clear, common understanding of the procurement. Technical requirement. We also talked about having documentation. You know, if you look at in many of these things here, conference, they have conference calls, pre-bidding conferences. When you look at a file, I mean, somebody mentioned here, I don't know who it was, they said that they audit a procurement file. So if you look at the file, is there evidence that these things occurred? Were the vendors contacted? Did the vendors get together? Did the vendors discuss? Were there questions? Were there answers? Okay, so there's questions and answers. What's more important? Probably the more important thing is there's questions, you know, rather than the answers are secondary. First you have to have questions and what the nature of the questions are. Advertising, here, general circulation. Most government jurisdictions require public advertising of contracts on advertising of subcontracts on government contracts. So as I say here, you know, what kind of, you know, I mentioned Fed Biz Ops, newspaper, billboard, magazines. Oftentimes you find that, you know, a particular procurement is only advertised for half an hour, one day, someday in a very remote part of the country, and somebody gets the award. So how long was something advertised? Output from solicitation. Also sellers prepare documents. A proposal, response to quote, it gives some ideas, it gives some guidance. It also solves some problems. It may, a proposal may actually give you some ideas about how to solve a problem. Okay, one of the other things is that okay, so we've moved from what, planning to planning the solicitation, doing the solicitation. The fourth stage is selection of the source. Contract negotiations, weighing system, screening system, and the output. So the input is this, the techniques are these, and the output is a contract. Source selection involves receipt of proposals. Many factors need to be evaluated. We'll look at a couple of those in a second. But the selection here, evaluation criteria, organizational policies. Okay, we'll look in a couple minutes here about a weighting system, quantifying qualitative data to minimize the effect of prejudice in one source. A weighting system assigns particular values to factors within the procurement. Okay, here's a little sample sheet, but if you look at the percentages, yeah, price is only 20%. Technical approach, management approach, past performance, This is what? This is 30 and 30 is 60, and this is 80%. So 80% is based on the, 60% is based on the approach, 20% is based on past performance. Minimum requirements and independent estimates. Yeah, there may be a minimum threshold. You have to have a minimum score, a minimum amount of points in an evaluation to actually be considered to be selected. And in here, you also may independently estimate, you may actually make an evaluation what something might cost. You know, you may have your own internal engineering department, and they might actually say that a school costs so and so much to construct, or you can get your own prices about how much an automobile costs or how much a vehicle costs. So you may have your own independent estimates. Okay, the output actually fine. Once you select the source, then what do? You sit down and you do a contract. Okay, and then here, time and materials or unit price contracts. These are a couple of different types of contracts that could be entered into. Time and material, oops. Time and material here contains both reimbursable and fixed price. So it's not really, it's time and material, the time and material. So we don't say it's $100,000 or 100,000 rupees. We say that it's the time, you know, valued at so much and the materials valued at so much, okay? Fixed price, cost reimbursable. Yeah, but in each case here, what? It's achievement of what? The particular statement of work, correct? Each contract is to achieve a statement of work, all right? 75. Contract, 3 broad categories: fixed price lump sum, cost reimbursable, or, okay, fine. So contract issues, and we'll look at each one of these contract issues: thresholds, signature authority, contract justification. All right. Contract administration. So this is the 5th stage of procurement management, 5th stage. Okay, and one thing that we shouldn't forget as auditors in all this is that what? There should be segregation of duties, internal controls, there should be separation of authority, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. Contract administration is the process of ensuring that what? Key aspects are managed among the various providers, so that contract administration is a particular activity to make sure that everyone is doing what they should according to the contract, correct? Contract administration here, the project management process must be applied to have what? Quality control, change control, plan execution. All right, and here we got the guy with the, with the money. So payment terms should be tied to what? To achievement of these particular objectives, correct? Payment should be tied to the achievement of the objectives of the program plan or project plan. Okay, tools and contract administration. Performance reporting provides management with information about how effective the seller is achieving the contractual objectives. Well, yeah, it's, again, what type of performance reporting is going on? How often is it going on?
This is a National Procurement Commission website, all right? Now, you're discussing theory right now and process. One thing I've noticed is I want to draw your attention that what Robert is saying, all of the procurement manuals that you should be looking at in relation to the different phases of procurement, I think there's 4 or 5, some people say there's 7, but the procurement cycle, but this is the access point for information that you need to know in the in the local context, Sri Lanka context, all right? It's National Procurement Commission of Sri Lanka, and you'll come up with this web page. And here you will notice a number of different downloads, okay? Guidelines and manuals, all right? So we have the 2006 guidelines. It can also be found on forms of contract on the MOF website where everyone is centered, all right? But here is a new one, National Procurement Commission. The National Procurement Commission is very unique, all right, in that when it publishes and gazettes something, it's law. Why? Because it's a part of the 19th Amendment that was brought in with the new government. So everything that's published here is legally binding when it comes to enforceability of contracts and the relationships to parties involved. They also have an access to a new guideline that they're working on, 2017 guideline. So I would encourage everyone to take a look at this, particularly what's enforceable now are the 2006 Procurement Manual guidelines. Goods, work, services, and PPP.
So let's go back to my other slide. So we got the 5 steps, and we're going to see here procurement notices. So what should we look for? Maybe we should look for what? Specifications, right? Statements of work. It's all there. And contract administration is not going to be there because it's after the fact, I guess. What kind of claims are occurring? What kind of disputes are occurring? What kind of activity is occurring? All right, change requests. If the seller's work is unsatisfactory, then a decision to terminate would be called for, would also be handled as a change request. What does this tell us? It tells us everything should be documented in procurement. It's documentation.
Ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to break the trend, but I also wanted to show you that on the Ministry of Finance's website, you will find the same information. Now, why is that? Because the 19th Amendment dictates that the National Procurement Commission is the sole body of which we will find all these documents. But remember, it's only about a year old. It's only about a year old, the NPC. So the Ministry of Finance, Public Finance Department, where you work, actually, it's in the same building, Mr. Algama, they've been doing this up until the 19th Amendment, but they're working very closely together to transition. Please notice here, procurement guidelines, procurement manual, contract administration manual, and all of the consulting contracts, including one that we very seldom hear about here, okay, is the Bidder's Guide to Successful in Public Procurement, to Success in Public Procurement. All right? That right there, that little brochure, which is very, very dynamic, is the outreach to the private sector to tell them that there's certain things that are no-nos. Huh? Some of the things that we all know we've been hearing about, that they shouldn't do certain things. Remember, that when we talk about problems with procurement, it's a two-way street. Somebody has to do something in order to foul it up. It could be, yes, it can be some of our officials and so forth, but the private sector are usually, unfortunately, the bad guys because they're the ones that's providing the service. So they can offer certain gratuities which are not applicable to the law. I mean, they can do a lot of different things to influence what's going on.
I mean, what Thomas is talking about here is very important. That because we talked about what the procurement auditing is, it has a big portion to do with compliance to these manuals, regulations, and guidelines. That's one side. But if we look at the future, when we look on Thursday, we'll look at this capital investment planning. So we don't only want to just check the boxes, we also want to look into the future. That's where the value for money, there's a crossover. When we look at value for money and performance auditing, a lot of it goes back into good or bad procurement.
After the contract is signed, then what do we do with it? That's where all of the claims, all of the cost overruns, mostly all of the corruption is found at that point because we lose track of it. But auditors don't lose track of it. Okay, when you do a procurement audit, you got to do from front end to completion, to the end of the project. And this manual is required of officials who, after the contract signing, mostly it's the engineer, the chief engineer, someone appointed, that will be following this process. And this process is a Sri Lankan-based process. It's not one from California or from Australia. This is required, okay? And there's forms there. To make it easy on the contract administrator, there's over 69 forms here that's required, okay? And it's standard language. Now, we put those up on the internet also in another area on our Google Drive so that they can be downloaded, and they're fill-in forms. Fill-in forms. They should be in the procurement file.
Potential audit points for change control. Oh, what do we got here, Mr. Chimika? Project team members should discuss all important telephone calls and meetings as part of a change control. If I was an auditor and they weren't doing change control documentation, there's an audit point. Impact analysis. What is the impact of the change? Was it going to have an impact? Need to be reviewed and approved by the same people and the same manager originally was part of the approval. If one person sets the contract and another person changes the contract, is that good or bad? I don't know. It says here that need to be reviewed, approved, and documented by the same people in the same way as the original plan was approved, right? So, inputs to contract administration, seller invoices, supporting documentation. Inputs a seller in correspondence, a correspondence file, any kind of correspondence. Again, this is probably one of the 69 forms. What kind of correspondence? Warnings of unsatisfactory performance, any kind of clarifications? Yes, 6. All right, so we went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, closing out the contract. What do we do when we actually get something done? I guess this is one of the folders people were talking when you go out to audit. You audit an ongoing contract or a closed contract. A closed contract, when the contract is closed out, here, one of the 16, formal acceptance and closure, the contract file. This contract is not limited to the contract. Any technical documentation, results of contract-related inspections, this should all be in the file, part of the documentation. And what else do we have here? It involves both product verification and the archiving for future use. Archiving is very important. Being able to find something easily is an art in itself. It's okay, go. A notice, and this is again probably one of the 69, a formal acceptance and closure. Yeah, who signs off? There should be a sign off maybe from an engineer, from the users, from the finance department. So the contract file is a complete set of records. All right, so we looked at procurement management. It's got what? It's got 6 steps. Solicitation planning, or no, needs analysis, solicitation. What are the 6 steps? Who knows the 6 steps?
One of the 6 steps are the procurement planning, solicitation planning, solicitation, and source selection, contract documentation, contract management, and close out.
We're going to look at the various documents that are used in procurement, which would include some trade documents, some key terms. As I say, there's a United Nations Commission on International Trade Law, and then there's the International Chamber of Commerce terms, INCO terms, and these are important. I think they're important that we should know because we could recognize like CFR, different X terms, X doc, X shipping. We'll look at these, and we're also going to look at payment. We'll look at letters of credit and X, so it's 2 blocks. We understood this morning about procurement management and basically the 6 steps involved: solicitations, pre-solicitation, contract closeout, contract management. Now we'll look more at the terms. The shipment of goods is still basically driven by slips of paper. What does that mean? That means whenever something moves, there's usually a document, bill of lading, bill of transfer, bills to get the goods to move. You have to have some kind of paper, bill of lading. We'll look at each one of these, some kind of commercial invoice, various things. So let's look next. Central to all international trade transactions. One of the reasons that documentation is so important is that it has to do with title. When you cross a border, when you go from one country to another or one district to another, who actually owns the goods? Banks with instructions and accounting for collection of payment. Again, ownership is what? Ownership is not necessarily it's only what's on the paper. If it's a commercial invoice, what's on the invoice? It also has to do with shipping information. What kind of instructions are provided? How do we move something from Colombo to Dubai, or from Dubai to Ratnapura? So provides an accounting record also. Purchase order, CRM, we'll look at what a CRM document is. A commercial invoice is different maybe than a regular invoice. Airway bill, packing list. Bills of lading, letter of credit. Multimodal bill of lading, FBL, we'll look at that. Certificate of origin, an inspection certificate. And each one of these comes out and has a different purpose. We'll look at a number of these and see what they mean. Purchase order. So a purchase order, main contract form. Purchase order, you may have a contract, but under a contract, you're going to have a purchase order. I want to buy so many, I make a contract with a company to buy so many cameras, but I'm going to issue an individual purchase order, which is a signed commitment to deliver a specific goods, constitutes acceptance. I receive the purchase order, you issue the purchase order. We have an agreement for a transaction. International commercial invoice contains all the information about international sales, sales in foreign markets, the quantity, delivery, payment terms, taxes. It's important that what they talk about the tax, when is the tax due, who is the tax due to, why is the tax due? It's all on an international commercial invoice, which may be in fact different from a domestic invoice. We'll look here, CMR, transportation document. Okay, what does CMR mean? Anybody know? CMR, any idea? It says on your slide what CMR, it's a French abbreviation. And what is it? A contract for transportation of merchandise on the road. That's what CMR is. Many times you find these documents are in French because it's considered an acceptable language for international transactions. And so, packing list, invoice number, quantity, description of goods, weight of the goods, number of package, shipping, marks and numbers. Yeah, packing lists, and who, you also have to think about when you're an auditor, who looks at what? The person that actually is delivering the goods, they basically, all they need is a packing slip. They don't need to see the invoice. They certainly don't need to see this commercial transportation document. Here are the responsibilities of the parties carried by road internationally. It also goes for not only road, but any kind of transportation international. Consignee will sign to confirm the delivery from the goods and justify the payment of services. So a CMR, you're going to ask, where is the CMR? What does the CMR say? And why does it say it? Okay? Airway bill has to do here, non-negotiable transport document covering transport from airport to airport. We have land documents, we have airway bill. An airway bill is important because it's covered for transport by air. And it says here it's not a title of property. A bill of lading, what's the difference between a bill of lading and a packing slip? Yeah, bill of lading here is an agent document issued by the agent of a carrier to a shipper, signed by an agent, furnishing written evidence of goods receipt. So a packing list and a bill of lading are actually two different types of commercial documents, commercial paper. Here, multimodal bill of lading. This is here, there's an organization here, International Federation of Freight Forward Association, that certifies who can issue such a multimodal. So it goes from a truck to a ship, back to a truck. Okay, so when we see this, we recognize what is a multimodal. Why is this important? It's all important because the documentation has to be available, it has to be compliant to the contract, it has to be compliant with internally to one another, so that what? So we could actually pay for the goods in accordance with what the invoice says here. Invoice, Incoterms, and we'll look at each one of the Incoterms here later, the International Chamber of Commerce terms. What items are in the shipment? What's included? Here's a pro forma invoice. Here's a packing slip. Certificate of origin is often required, particularly when you're dealing with the contracts from donors or from the government. Where are these goods coming from? Are the goods coming from a country that's on a blacklist or that's on an embargo? Where is it coming from? This product is coming from Sri Lanka, or this product is coming from China, or this product is coming from the United States. It's the chambers of commerce that actually issue the certificates of origin. So if you see a certificate of origin, you want to look and see that it actually has been issued by the Chamber of Commerce. All right, inspection certificate is usually issued by a particular neutral testing. So the inspection, you know, the metal or the steel, the glass, the food product, the medicine has been inspected by who? Who's it been inspected by? The World Health Organization? Has it been inspected by a particular engineering company? Bill of lading. The bill of lading here is what's the bill of lading had. Here's a sample of a bill of lading. And the bill of lading has whatever the name of it says here, steamship, but it could be the whatever vehicle it's coming under, the voyage, the number of package, and it gives title. The bill of lading is a document that normally exchanges title or the rights to own the good. I have the bill of lading, I own the documents. Financial documents, and as I say later, we'll look at each one of these, the letter of credit and the payment terms, documentary transfer agreements. Any kind of letter of credit means I can collect money or I can pay money. The next key terms, a forwarding agent. A forwarding agent is a freight forwarder, party to the bill if different from the consignee. You could have another party. A party to the bill could be a bank. It could be a broker. It could be some sort of middleman. Consignee, the party who is purchasing or receiving the goods, the buyer. Consignee and buyer is the same thing. Seller, who is actually selling the goods. Payment terms should be outlined on the invoice. So everything should be detailed on the invoice. The purchase order number, all these terms and references. Okay, the bill of lading here is a document of title. This is a specific document. Whoever has the bill of lading here, it's a document of title issued by a carrier to a shipper upon receiving goods. This means the liability, issued by a carrier to a shipper upon receiving goods. So actually he takes ownership. And there's a subterm here, negotiable bill of lading. Carrier will only release the cargo once they receive the original bill endorsed by the consignee. So this is why you have, whenever you sign, you know, somebody delivers something, you sign. What are you signing? You're signing the bill of lading. You receive the goods. They release the goods to you, okay? The original bill, whenever I receive goods, I sign the negotiable bill of lading, and I accept responsibility for the goods. Okay, and there's a term here, endorsement, similar to signing endorsement. Express bills of lading. Express bills of lading cannot be used in document transfer because the goods have already been pre-released. So an express bill of lading, a negotiable bill of lading, an express bill of lading cannot be used in documentary transfer. And we'll see later when we look at the letter of credit, you can't, an express bill of lading can't be used in a letter of credit. Express bill of lading cannot be used to receive payment. Okay, we'll talk a little bit here now about the Incoterms. Destination risk passes when goods are tendered to the buyer at the destination. And that's what these Incoterms actually have. When is the risk? The risk passes to when does the risk pass between the buyer and the seller? So in a destination contract, whenever they deliver it, the risk passes. Shipment contract, risk of loss passes when goods are handed to the carrier. So whenever they leave the factory, or they leave the place that they're manufactured, that's when the risk of loss passes to the purchaser. Okay, as I said, and these are all defined here, the Incoterms. International Chamber of Commerce, founded in 1919 in Paris, 120 countries. The WTO, the United Nations. All right, and here's what here are examples of transportation documents. Here it talks about, and we'll look at each one of these there's short definitions for it, but air transport documents, seaway bills, airway bills, bill of lading, Article 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. So each one of these transport documents are defined, what's involved. What's in here, they standardize, they outline the costs, what fees, what costs are involved, who pays for what, who is responsible, which parties are responsible up to when and where, what risks are involved, exactly what point of location do we transfer the risk from the seller to the buyer, are the necessary costs included in the price? CFI, we'll look at each one of these individually. Here's CIP, FOB, FAS. These are the Incoterms. Okay, here are there's F terms, E terms, C terms, and D terms. F terms, free carrier, free along ship, free on board. We'll look at each of these individually. Cost and freight, cost insurance and freight, carriage to paid. You'll see these on invoices, you'll see them in contracts, you'll see them in bills of lading. Okay, and where else should you see them? You see them on the invoice, but where else should you see them? X works. Name, place. The seller minimizes risk by making only goods available at his own premises. So these are the positive departure, E departure, which means what? It means that, you know, one offer may be X works, and it may be cheaper than another company's offer that may not be X works. It may be, in fact, FOB. So we have to look, when we do an analysis, we have to look at what they're offering according to the Incoterms. Okay, let's look at this here. Freight not paid. Main carriage, the F group. Free alongside ship. Free carrier, free on board. FOB, free on board. Under the F terms, the seller arranges and pays for the pre-carriage into the country of export, including export clearance under FAC and FOB. Okay, and again, when you're out auditing, you might want to say, look, you know, letters of credit, how much money is it costing? And maybe we put that as part of our contract negotiations, that we actually go under a documentary credit Why is the government issuing, so people make money off of letters of credit. If you're selling to the Sri Lankan government pays its bills, maybe it should be issuing documentary credits. So here's the different most secure, least secure, cash in advance there's just a scale here, you can look at this. All right, so today is basically, we'll look at a lot of questions. It's the audit manual, and I think hopefully everybody got a chance to look at the audit manual. If you did pass it around. As it's been mentioned before, you can download a soft copy, and it's good if you get a soft copy because you could actually mark it up and you could make your own notes to it. So get a soft copy better than a hard copy. And it says here that it was the Auditor General it was prepared for the Auditor General, but procurement auditing is procurement auditing, so it's also applicable. Situation applicable. Procurement has the highest priority. Yesterday we talked about it. Enhancing the quality of citizen lives. Go ahead. To meet the national development. I think yesterday when Mr. Tom showed us the website, it mentioned that there's a lot of projects that have been initiated in Sri Lanka that really haven't been that successful. Objectives of procurement auditing here. The product is delivered on time, properly accounted for, according to objectives and needs. Okay, and I think the important thing here is that we look and we see that, the number 1, 2, and 3 are basically compliance audit. Number 4, identify weaknesses and recommend improvements. Whereas number 4 is what more of a performance audit type application. The auditor here, general principles of procurement auditing, and here fully independent. Fully independent, the auditor is fully independent. All right, so in fact, you're basically, it's good. I think last time a lot of the people, if we're at the forensic auditing, we're just talking about forensic auditing. So procurement auditing, if you get into identifying violations, this is where the forensic auditing really comes into how do you identify the violations. Forensic auditing, the auditor is free to determine scope here. This is part of the audit manual. Have unrestricted access to information and documents. Okay, and here it says when funded by an international institution, the rules must not restrict the auditor in any form. And that's in fact in the case where the international institution, the public or the partner, the international partner may in fact ask that audits be done. You may have be engaged as a joint venture auditor. And that's where it says here, any form, must not restrict in any form. So values added with good better, this is what it says here, reduce wastage of public resources, reduce waste, reduce failure to comply. If we actually do our procurement audits, reasonable assurance of criteria, rules, and regulations, the outcomes would be here, mitigate risk, prevent fraud, improve performance. Okay, and this is actually one area that personally I've had experience, is that when the audit department or when the Auditor General asks for money or the internal auditors, you could actually say here, we have actually saved resource. Our procurement auditing saves money for the government, therefore makes the internal audit function a lower cost. And lower cost means what? Lower cost actually means that you can get more resources. You could actually say that by doing procurement auditing, we're funding financial auditing or we're funding training, the cost savings. It makes a good discussion point when it comes to the budget for the audit department. Okay, here, Article 154 here empowers the Auditor General to audit all government undertakings under any written law. So this is part of the Sri Lankan law, Article 154. explicit access to explanations as may be necessary. So there has to be, when you ask questions, you have to receive answers. So if you get a question, if you ever get a question, why are you looking at this particular procurement? It's Article 154. What was our sixth bit of value? We have Procurement Audit Lifecycle. So there's pre-qualification, bidding procedure, bid evaluation, contracting, contract performance, post-evaluation and grading, negotiations. I mean, you could actually go and see, we can go out and see how do suppliers get qualified? What are the reasons? Who can be qualified? Why can they be qualified? What are they qualified for? And how much linkage is there here between number 6 and number 1? Post-evaluation, pre-qualification, they're related to each other. All right, contract performance and evaluation, breaches of contract, eventualities, whatever issues, guarantee issues, these two are actually linked together, okay? Procurement auditing consists of verification and compliance of procurement standards by the NPC and the International Procurement Standards and Practices. If there's here it provides the Procurement Audit Manual, which is passing around here. The Procurement Audit Manual provides guidance on how to conduct a procurement audit. There's also there's appendices in there with checklists and questionnaires. And the important thing here, it says used when procurement audit is part of a financial audit or as a standalone exercise. You know, actually as part of almost every financial audit that I've ever been engaged in, we've always done work in procurement. You know, why? Because there's accounts payable, paying invoices. Anytime there's money going out, that means there's procurement coming in. People, and as we said before, and we've also seen here, procurement audits contribute to government efforts. So how does it contribute to the government efforts?
Because we're using government funds, that's why for contribute.
Structured here through process of procurement planning through to contract administration. And yesterday we talked, we spent a little bit of time talking about procurement planning.
Excuse me, Robert, but I'd also like to point out that now we're talking about standards that are universal, okay? So whether or not we're talking about donor financed or we're talking about general fund, the standards are still the same. Now, the donors may require a few more bits and pieces, all right? But what we're talking about here is a standard applied to what we know is a context of Sri Lanka. Donors may require something else, but basically we're talking standard principles here of auditing. Mostly I always go back to performance. I'm not an auditor. I do procurement audits as a procurement specialist, all right? But this is very important to understand, that we're talking about overall principles. So someone's going to raise their hand and say, what about ADB or World Bank audits, procurement audits? We're talking the same principles, okay? I just want to put that out early, okay?
Yeah, sure, and as Thomas mentioned, yes, World Bank has a whole set of procedures for acquisition of services for consultants. Maybe it would be appropriate, we'll put on into the share folder, I have a number of the World Bank procedures. We could put those in there so you could look at them, but the way they select might be different than the way that the Sri Lankan government selects. The point I was going to make earlier about procurement planning is, what does that have? It has an impact on the budget development, correct? Doing the budget properly. Contract administration, what does that have an impact on? Contract administration is important. It has a number of things. In addition to what? The fixed assets, receipt of equipment. So contract administration is very important here. Procurement audit, improve good governance, ensure compliance. Value for money. The value for money is, why don't we look at value for money here? Traditional financial audits provide comfort that all allocated funds properly managed comply with their all. Okay, but the difference, what would be the difference? These are the basic, they're the same. What would be different objectives in procurement auditing? It probably would be compliance. In performance auditing, yes, you may have compliance, but you don't have compliance to the national procurement, to the procurement regulations, World Bank regulations. Value for money is the optimal combination of the whole life cycle cost and quality to meet requirements and due regard to propriety and regularity. Propriety and regularity means what? It means the fact that something is actually fit for use, that we buy chairs or we buy medicine. I think there's been examples of medicine. We buy medicine that's not expired, that's appropriate to the situation. It also means what? It means that instead of a 500cc engine, what does it mean? We buy a vehicle, transportation. Maximize it. To ensure the best value for money, the process should what? Ensure that there's an impartial and comprehensive evaluation. We talked about evaluation yesterday. Ensure the highest degree of realism when performance is expected to best meet the specification statement of works in terms of reference. And what do we find? We talked a little bit yesterday about statement of work. Statement of work, what items does statement of work have in it? Who remembers? Do you remember? Anybody remember what's in the statement of work?
Comprehensive details about the procurement, description regarding the procurement, specifications and all other procedures in the procurement.
And what's the difference? Scope of work and statement of work. There's a difference. Is there a difference between scope of work and statement of work?
A scope means objective of the work. Statement means in the detail is description.
And how many, at the scope of work and the statement of work, how many items? There is what, 7 items in the statement of work? If we remember from yesterday, there's what? There's also place of delivery, what's going to happen, place of delivery, method of acceptance, allowance for changes. So the statement of work here, this is where it comes in, this is where it's important. That's where you define value for money. When you go out to do an audit of procurement, it actually might be worthwhile, instead of checking all the boxes and looking at the statements of work. If you really want to find some kind of systemic issue, look at the statements of work. Are the statements of work complete? Are they comprehensive? Are they understandable? For the items that they mentioned on the website yesterday, we saw that Sri Lanka engaged in building whatever roads, infrastructure projects. The projects were delayed for a long time. It could be what? One thing that could be wrong is the statement of work, terms of references were incorrect. It could be what? That the vendor selection was incorrect. It could be that there was quality of service issues. It could be that they focused more on the lowest price. So, and this comes into the value. Am I doing a procurement audit just to make sure that everything's in compliance with the manual? Or am I going to another level, a higher level? Am I doing a procurement audit with value for money? Because you could have, at the end of the day, they purchased everything was compliant, but it wasn't the right thing. Did I buy the right thing, or did I buy the thing, I bought it correctly, but I didn't buy the correct item? Okay, and this is where the crossover is between performance auditing, procurement auditing, forensic auditing. It's all good that we've did these in a triangle. Everybody's attended. You'll be attending. You attended the forensic auditing. Now you attended performance or procurement. A couple weeks from now, we'll talk about performance. Okay, again, the Auditor General Department has Special Investigation Division. Special Investigation Unit here does special purpose audits. And special purpose audits here are governed under this international auditing standard for supreme audit institutions. It's in the manual. When you're looking in the manual, you'll see this reference. NPP, National Objectives of Procurement, Public Procurement. These are the these are what are declared here, non-discriminatory promotion of domestic employment and industry. We looked at the same thing here yesterday. What is it? That procurement systems carry out its responsibility to the citizens. So procurement systems carry out the responsibilities to the citizens. So, but we have the weighing and the testing. The weighing and the testing means that's, how do we define appropriate? We evaluate, do some kind of ABC analysis, VED. We talked about the analysis yesterday. We also do here testing. Testing is an examination, bid evaluation, that's testing, right? So how do we determine what's appropriate? The whole life cycle here, the whole life cycle through the end of the useful life. And this means when we acquire whatever, furniture, equipment, what do we do with it when we're done after 20 or 30 or 40 years? What happens to it? It just piles up somewhere? We talked, here's the 6 steps again, identification needs, planning, budgeting, here the budgeting, specifications, bid preparation, appointment, approval, and bid documentation, okay? So, and the TEC is what? The Technical Evaluation Committee or the Procurement Committee. So there's a Technical Evaluation Committee or a Procurement Committee. Hallmarks of a sound, principles of procurement, hallmarks of a sound, you know, what can we say what a sound procurement system is? Transparency and consistency is probably number one here, this one here, transparency and consistency. And what else would we have here? We would say that possibly what? Retaining confidentiality of information is also important. Broader objectives here in procurement is here, compliance with the guidelines. Operationally here, avoiding irregularities. Complementary here, transparent here, accountability, assume responsibility, being held to account. The fairness one here, it says offering opportunity to anyone. The advertising solicitation, offering opportunities. We had yesterday, we talked about Fed Biz Ops, Fed Business Opportunities. Transparency, ability to understand and see through, process visible to all. Okay, and who's actually doing business with the government is where are all the disbursements going to? In the United States, they publish who are the biggest suppliers. Procurement here, participation of small business firms. In the United States, they have particular regulations that support the engagement of small enterprises. Conflicts here, it says a small benefit or specific group. You know, oftentimes you find people, particularly in higher levels of government, moving from government into private enterprise and moving back into private government. They cycle through. The system of checks and balances here, the public prosecutor, the anti-corruption commission, legislature, internal audit units, the procurement body, checks and balances, the Supreme Audit Board, Supreme Audit Institution, public sector control of auditing. Okay, here, and this is what I've been talking about here earlier. It says here, ensure that take a forward-looking, constructive approach to procurement, highlight good procurement by practical examples, support managing risk-taking and innovation, identify improvements for, this is part of the internal audit activities, compliance audit, performance audit, good governance and procurement. Okay, here in one of the audit strategies, before a major procurement is finalized, we were talking to somebody yesterday during the break and that said they get 2 kinds of folders. Contracts that are closed and contracts that are open. What about looking at contracts before a major procurement is finalized? You may want to audit to prevent poor procurement, right? Okay, and this was for the Supreme Audit Board. It's carry out studies for Parliament, but there certainly is no reason that an auditor working inside a ministry is an internal auditor could also do something similar to this. They can engage in looking at contracts before they're actually closed, deals that are underway, to make sure that the deals are proper. Similar here, comprehensive analyzing, public procurement audit procedures are very similar to other audits. The main difference here, What's the similarities? We're going to review and evaluate. We're going to interview people involved. We're going to analyze information. We're going to generate a report. Those are the basic audit steps. So we'll start and we'll work through the audit cycle. So audit cycle here, plan, execution, report, monitor, follow-up, determine the area, the scope, the criteria, subjectives, and the questions. Procurement audit stages, audit preparation, procurement audit plan, procurement audit program. We'll look later at audit program in detail. Okay, the objective of the procurement audit. Here, the whole government. Objective of procurement audit preparation, whole government. Assess the government procurement strategy, assess the departmental strategy, and audit a single procurement project. Strategic plan, the strategic procurement plan here looks for long-term 3 to 5 years, developed at a directorate level. Typically, we find here that we're auditing where at this level includes, for each individual micro-planning, we're looking at particular procurements, correct? How much auditing are we doing of the strategic plans? We're doing more micro-planning than we are doing strategic audit, long-term plans, okay? As far as the annual procurement audits here, planning defines the objectives of an annual procurement audit. Yeah, the strategic plan actually is very important. Each one of these is important. This is probably important because it determines the long-term destiny of the ministry. You'd probably want to look at a strategic plan and see how does that relate to the procurement activities. Micro level, real time, ex post, and that's kind of sounds what we're doing here. We're looking at the results of contract awards. We're looking at bid notices. We're looking at contracts that are already occurred. The macro level here, they talk of it. It talks about this in your audit manual. It talks about here control environment, risk assessments. Head of the audit director will do the following here. The operational audit plan is then prepared. So micro planning, and this is part of the audit PAM, Procurement Audit Manual. They're going to look at legislation changes. They're going to look at staff availability. In the operational plan, the period covered, summary of the risks, the mandatory activities, audit activities, and the list of assignments. Determining the scope here. This talks again in the audit manual. What kind of tests are we going to do? What are the boundaries of the audit? What kind of systems efficiency and effectiveness? What kind of control reviews are we going to do? The audit objectives here. Comply with, prepare required bid evaluation reports. Approve letter here to verify criteria. Verify that the procurement committees follow rules and regulations in the government procurement guidelines, procurement manuals, and related supplements. The audit activity. Procurement committee members here know the procurement rules and regulations that here minor procurement committees properly appointed. The chief accounting officer here, procurement committee head appointment properly approved by the chief accounting officer. Okay, it talks about it in the audit manual. Again, it talks about 2 different kinds of audit methodology. You could do a desk review or you could do a field review. In the case of a procurement auditing, it's fairly easy to do desk reviews. Okay, but a field audit here is probably more interesting. You go out and identify, what is the procurement activity going on? How are they doing? Are the things being received properly? Are they being dispersed properly? Who's managing the contract? If it's a building project, how is the building project? And probably the most important document there would be what? It would be the statement of work, yes? The statement of work, you should be able to go out into the field. The statement of work may be interesting for a desk audit, but it's also probably more interesting in a field audit. A field audit, I take my statement of work, I go out and I say, okay, did the work occur? Was the medicine delivered? Is the medicine compliant with what's on the statement of work? But then also here, your forensic audit skills, and then we'll look at performance auditing. You take it to the next, by observation, verification, physical checking, requesting information. This is where you're going to find out where procurement fraud comes more into the results of your audit by doing field work. That's why we have here, we're putting this, doing a desk review, fine. You look at the letter of credit. Is the letter of credit there? Is the pro forma invoice there? Is the acceptance certificate present? Yes or no? in a desk audit. So you could do these in you could either do a desk audit first and then do a field audit, or you can do a field audit and then do a desk audit. Yeah, benchmarking here, benchmarking comparison. We talk about benchmarking here. National Procurement Committee recognized entities talking about benchmarking, comparison between contract price and fair market value, reasonable market price. Using the experts. One time, many years ago, I was engaged in doing an audit of a acquisition. Somebody wanted to build a factory. Company was going to build a manufacturing facility. It was a part of their procurement plan was to build a factory. So what we actually ended up doing, we had to get an engineer in to assess how much earth was moved, how much concrete was laid, how much concrete was involved, how much pipe was involved. As an auditor, I had to use an expert. Potential violations indicating corruptions here. Investigation type audit steps necessary when this is directed here at the Supreme Auditor. The Supreme Auditor here says that they have a procurement investigation unit, involvement of procurement investigation unit. Again, in the manual's written for the Supreme Audit Board, but it says here that if there's any kind of fraud or indication of corruption, they engage here an investigation unit. Audit planning should take into account the general controls within the department. If parts of purchasing are computerized here, purchasing of raw materials during the audit planning, you have to take into consideration here what type of materials are being acquired. Procurement planning, preparatory stages here. You want to get a copy of the master procurement plan, the annual procurement plan, procurement packages, summaries. Okay, procurement time schedule for each contract package in a detailed plan. Part of your pre-contracting, you'd want to see that there's this time schedule involved. Audit program preliminary. During the preliminary survey, the auditor should gain an understanding of how the process in the organization occurs. So as part of the procurement, the preliminary survey, you're going to write your audit programs. Discussions with the auditor, objectives here, the audit target. Prepare the audit program, aim for manage to get an understanding of the objectives, that the procurement audit is not a procurement investigation. Okay, and it says here that it's a procurement investigation, not a it's a procurement audit, not a procurement investigation. That's one thing that we really need to emphasize. So information to be gathered here, financial procurement data on procurements, unresolved procurement issues. Yesterday I mentioned about the open letters of credit. One of the most important things to look is what open issues are involved. Okay, information to be gathered would include brief history and background of selected procurements. So you want to sit down and you want to talk to people, not only the people that are ordering the equipment and ordering the products, but the people that are using the products. Okay, and these are items that would go into your audit working papers, your working paper file, to gain an understanding of the system. Again, in the audit manual, it says here, request a purchasing walkthrough from a senior member in the procurement department. So you want to sit down and have them explain to you how a procurement occurs. Okay, you also want to hear identify various types of transactions and document the flow of those throughout the organization. So how do actual procurements for material occur? How do procurements for services occur? Okay, and that's why we have here the guy putting the gear into the wheel. Here's the gears. He's putting the gear into to get the system going, the audit. Okay, sources of procurement information. Again, written from the perspective of the Supreme Audit Board. They would look at internal audit reports and supervisory committee. But they also would look here at standard operating procedures. The budget, we talked also about the budget. Because what? Procurement plan actually feeds into the budget, correct? Two distinct types of audit plan here. A detailed audit plan for the individual auditors and planning at the audit directorate. Procurement audit on-site staff helps the Supreme Audit Board focus procurement audit plan. The section 4000 of the audit manual should be followed. The audit manual 4000 we'll look at in a second. But here, general and financial audit, the first stage of procurement requires the preparation of an procurement audit plan. You should ask for it. I mean, I think that you should have access to it. I mean, they should give you access to it, and if they don't give you access, I'd ask them officially. It's a public information document. Anybody should have access to it, correct or incorrect. All right, we'll look through again. The audit manual, let's keep in mind that this audit manual was prepared to be used as a standalone document, so it's planning a procurement audit. So we'll actually, when we get through these slides, there's another group of slides to do. We'll look at a procurement audit program. We'll look at procurement audit fraud, okay? So let's see, preparation during the audit planning activity should customize for each type of material or service. So if you're doing a particular type of acquisition for medicine, for books, or airplane tickets or travel services, let's look at this. Okay, and also says general controls and general applications. So the planning, fine, we'll look at internal controls over procurement, and we also have a case study that discusses the internal controls over procurement. So the planning should take into account the controls, okay? Okay, and as I say, we're going to have we'll have a whole group of slides about the procurement audit program. But fine here, identify the audit risk, develop, test, and execute controls, develop substantive tests, okay? So in procurement, where's the big risk? What are the risks in procurement? You know, where is the real risk? Is it before the contract is issued, after the contract is issued?
In normal practice in Sri Lanka, most of the procurement audit started from the after payment is made. This source document is the payment voucher. Then we have to go to the backward. But if this after payment, check-in is sometimes we can say that meaningless since the payment has been already gone. If this we can start it from the very beginning of the process, that should be more meaningful. Even the Audit General Department also audited in this way. Therefore, I asked from Mr. Bob, what are the benchmark practice in the US you are using for that procurement audit? That's no useful to check in really. This, yeah. We like to get the others' view also. Thanks.
So yeah, I mean, again, once the contract here, the audit risk. So you may want to be engaged in auditing. How do we actually get into we talked yesterday about procurement plan, pre-solicitation. We've also talked about vendor qualifications. All right, the objectives here is to substantiate the controls are in place or effective. Compliance testing, substantive testing. So compliance testing, if we actually started, instead of looking at, if we looked at before a contract, before we decide to buy the plates, what are we going to look at? We're going to do procurement of plates for the Ministry of Health, right? So what kind of compliance testing, what kind of substantive testing, what would we do as far as procurement? You know, the fact that the plates are actually purchased, wouldn't we be more interested in knowing, you know, what are they going to be used for? Do they actually meet the needs? Can they be cleaned properly? What do they break? How do they break? How durable are they? It would seem that, you know, based on the information the gentleman, Sri Lanka is concentrating more on what? On the way we buy things or what we buy? You know, what do you think the procurement auditing in Sri Lanka is doing? It's concentrating more on what's being purchased, right? So the type and scope of testing should be based on the auditor's assessment of the internal system. If the auditor cannot rely on internal controls, heavy substantive testing. So we might, you know, as I say, if we look at the system, maybe we should actually be looking at, if we can't rely on the internal controls. And it seems here that what we have currently is we're looking at purchases once they've occurred. So we actually might want to be looking more, in our case, at procurement plans, how vendors are qualified, how vendors are disqualified. That's the more heavy testing that we would be doing. We'd be looking more at how vendors are qualified, how vendors are disqualified, how items are selected. You know, it would appear here that the controls over procurement, you know, they may be strong in paying out the money, but they're not necessarily that practical or that producing value for money. All right, and as I said here, this audit manual that you have was prepared for the Auditor General. And here the audit, there's a section 700, and here's all the guidance. And, well, yeah, and you should also, I mean, you should have, we discussed Freedom of Information Act. We discussed the Freedom of Information. Here's a good, write a letter to the Supreme Auditor and tell them you want a copy of the audit manual. That's it. It's freedom of information. Anyway, here we're going to we'll start looking at audit steps or audit tests. Okay, standard audit test here, compare purchase order prices with vendor catalogs if there's a variance. You know, the catalogs, and it's very interesting now. I mean, we could do all sorts of checks on prices. Here, sort the vendor file by vendor number and amount for duplicate payments. It's very interesting because Excel, your Excel is set up. There's actually a possibility to look for duplicates very easy. Okay, spot check of receivings periodically, and this is what we were talking during the break also. You know, one of the interesting things here is to go out into the field, go out, walk around, and look at the goods. You're looking at the fact that the invoices are there and the documents are all there, that the payment was made properly, but maybe the goods were never received. For favored vendors here, favored vendors here, vendors receiving large orders should be investigated if they're competition. So, you know, when you look at a vendor file, again, I told you earlier this morning about, you know, the United States says, you know, which companies get the most orders for particular items. It's, again, publicly available information. And certainly within, if you have a government financial information system, you might want to also see who are the larger vendors. Vendors accumulated in rank. Frequency of vendor orders should be accumulated in rank. This is something that you should be able to extract very easily from your accounting system and do an analysis. You know, document the duties of the individual. We have a case study specifically on this. Validate adequate segregation of duties. And I think we mentioned during forensic auditing, Visio. Did we talk about Visio here? We talked about, you know, how many people actually use Visio or flowchart. I mean, that's something we'll look at. Maybe I'll put in when we do the performance auditing, I'll show you as far as some flowcharts and process flows, how to make sure that we have segregation of duties here. Okay. Compliance to procedures, audit purchasing activity. Dates is always important. Looking, I told you yesterday about credit or letters of credit which are old. You know, looking at the various dates in the sequence numbers always turns up something potentially as an audit risk. Dates, proper dates. The requester has authorized the products. Looking at purchase requisitions versus purchase orders. Okay, and here, random number, I told you, you know, when we went through our little quiz, random numbers, again, it's when we did our quiz, it was a random number selection. So random numbers, we should be using random numbers all the time. We use random numbers because it eliminates the bias. If we find anything wrong, it eliminates people saying that you picked this one out. You can say, we just picked it out at random. Okay, items here, end of month liability analysis. Ideally, you want to look at what are the end of month liabilities? What do we owe at the end of the month? Because oftentimes we find out when there's a procurement fraud going on, the end of the month, it disappears. It's payable at the third week of the month. At the end of the month, it's gone, and then it reappears. So there's always some kind of accounting transaction going on. Purchase needs audit. Yesterday, what did we talk? We talked about a procurement plan, right? And we had a discussion during the break about procurement plan and about people, everything's urgent, urgent, urgent. So if I was an auditor and went out and looked at and I found out that there was a lot of urgent purchases, maybe I'd look in more detail and see, number one, what would happen? Do they already exist? Could we have done better planning in our purchasing? And then I might want to see the value for money aspect. Buying something, if I if we're going to buy so the glass of water costs maybe whatever, 10 rupees. But if I want water, it may cost 15 rupees or 20 rupees or 30 rupees. So the needs determine whether it already exists. So here's the water already exists. So I don't really need to go out and buy another bottle of water. Okay, so value for money is very important here. Okay, audit, we're going to talk a little about audit documentation. And if you remember from our forensic auditing course, we talked about evidence. So it should be evidence that's sustainable, understandable. Okay, evidence. This is audit evidence, audit documentation, the basis and extent of planning, work performed, the findings, sufficient information enable an uninvolved, experienced auditor to support the findings. If you remember from the forensic auditing course, we talked about evidence in a court of law. Remember that? And one of the basic principles here of auditing contains sufficient information to enable an uninvolved, experienced auditor to support the significant findings and conclusions. So each one of the working papers should be documented sufficiently that they support themselves. All right, part of the audit documentation here, a permanent file, a planning file, the audit programs. We're going to talk about the audit programs in a couple of minutes. And the results is what? The results is a conclusion or an opinion. And it should say what? It should say, I looked at so many purchase invoices and I found out that, you know, it appeared to me that there was a significant, there was only 1 or 2 days going between the issuance of the purchase order and the delivery of goods. Or I looked at a particular purchase and it took 6 months to be paid. The delivery was made 6 months ago and they only paid the invoice today. So what kind of problems could be there? The problems that could be there could be an inadequate statement of work. It could be that the documentation was not proper. What kind of documentation? Certificate of origin, certificate of compliance. So that's the audit evidence obtained. I looked at the certificate of origin, it was incorrect. Okay, I looked maybe here reaches significant conclusion reached. My conclusion is that because of the short or deficiencies in the procurement plan, that's a significant matter. The procurement plan is not being done properly. Therefore, we're having delays in purchasing, or we're actually doing things in an unorganized manner. Yeah, here, we talk purchase order level is actually what are we going to do? We're going to look at purchase orders because why? It's not, a purchase order is a contract between the government and the supplier. So we're not going to necessarily look at the invoices. We have to go back to the original purchase order. Okay, one of the things also you might want to look for, definitely look at, is the aging of which purchase orders have been completed, which purchase orders have not been completed, how old are the uncompleted purchase orders, because they may here be actually unrecorded liabilities, the annual procurement plan. Yeah, here, procurement plan checklist, these things that should be present here. The time scheduling and the detailed plan, selection of the procurement methods, we looked at this yesterday. Needs assessment. The goods is the specification. We always go back to the specification. Is the specification correct? So how would I, as an auditor, understand a specification that involves, say, purchasing of medicine? Or the construction here, specification's clear, correct. Any particular bias, any bias for a particular product. So pre-qualification documents, or the pre-qualification notice. Is the notice there, pre-qualification? Cost estimate, how accurate is it? And is it actually sanctioned? Is it approved? Who's going to approve the cost estimate? Is there an engineer? Is there a bid evaluation process? We're going to look at here, how much time did the evaluation take? What was the approval? How was it approved? Is there a big imbalance between the different bids? One person bid 10,000 rupees, the other person bid 100,000 rupees. Why were bids rejected? What was the particular, if I look at rejected, there should be a reason. They just, we reject your bid. Why are you rejecting our bid? We're rejecting your bid because of the bid rejection should be documented in a memo. All right, here, number 7, integrity of the committee and the procurement officers. Yeah, that's an interesting thing to look at also. And one of the things, are they being rotated? Do the people actually move between jobs? Do they take their annual vacation? You know, what kind of knowledge and skills do they have? Or do you have a particular, on a procurement committee, is there one finance person? Is there one engineer? Is there a doctor? Is there, you know, what is the composition of the procurement committee? When we look at contract implementation, is there in the United States, contracting officers have to receive they receive an appointment letter. I'm sure they have the same thing here. Do they have an appointment letter? A letter of appointment to sign a contract? Is that the case? All right, is there any extension? Yes. Is there any extension of time? Why was the extension of time granted? For what reason? Is there a reason why there's an extension of time? You know, what kind of dispute resolution procedures are involved? And is there any, you know, maybe there's no documentation of a dispute. In the, you know, the absence of any evidence doesn't necessarily mean there's not a problem. Maybe the absence of evidence of disputes means that there were disputes, but they weren't documented. And that's where it comes in here, the complaint process. What is the process? Is there a process? Why are they so slow? They're too slow. The handling of complaints, right? All right, and look at the bidder's guide. And does the bidder's guide actually allow for a complaint process? All right, vendors lists, purchase order files, purchasing manuals, common audit evidence, advertisements. Are the advertisements actually included into the, is a copy of the advertisement included into the purchase order file or the procurement file? Any kind of vendor catalogs, a history file recording a past vendor activity is considered audit evidence, okay? We'll start out in our next session. We'll have a lot of red flags, but here's some of the starts of, there's quantity delivered less than specifications. That's a red flag. Quality inconsistencies with the technical specifications. Unexplained delay in delivery. Okay, and this is the final step here. We're almost done. In an exit conference between the auditors and the person that's being audited, you want to make sure that you have a meeting and you do your recommendations and they make sure that they're practical. At the report here, it says as far as according to the Auditor General here, there's a draft report, a preliminary report, and a final report. This is the way they work. Okay, here, the procurement was excited, and there's an actual statement here, the report on the results. So it has to have a statement that it was compared to the NPC rules and regulations, yes or no. Yeah, here it says the Auditor General has the right and obligation to report the results to the auditee. And this, again, this comes out of the Auditor General mandate. The report must be presented in a timely manner. The objectives here include fairness and accountability. Objective information, so it's objective, it's not objective information. The information has to be objective. So what does that mean? It means that it's transparent. It means that any independent individual would come to the same conclusion, identify the weaknesses, set clear guidelines, so there should be guidelines for the response in the next step. Okay, summary of the results and findings, outline expectations in the significant manners for the Chief Audit Authority or Chief Audit Officer in management. Okay, that's it. Basis for the exit community, the Director Audit General and the will resolve committee. So again, this is for the audit, Supreme Audit, all right. Preliminary audit report. The preliminary audit report becomes the draft audit report becomes a preliminary audit report. The preliminary audit report is set out for formal comments, and there's an agreement, an expected date of completion, and an action plan, okay? All right, so that's the audit manual. Now we're actually getting into audit programs and audit risks. Why don't we do some case studies?
Case study number 3, procurement of travel tickets in public sector. Travel tickets are documents issued to confirm that an individual has purchased a seat on transport.
As the internal auditor engaged to review procurement activity, what items come to mind when preparing an RFQ for travel agent services?
The request for the qualification for the travel agency. First of all, we will have to see the compliance, whether the travel agencies are registered under the ITA, that is International Travel Agencies, because once you registered ITA only, they will provide the software. And whether we have adhered to the other rules and regulation and standards. That is the initial testing we had to do. Thereafter, we will have to ask for the number of travelers for the year, for the visits, courses, seminars, and workshops. And next, number of places and the location we intended to visit. That is important. And next, prices of the tickets with the discount. And the prices should include whether they will provide food and the wines. And what are the prices for the VVIPs, VIPs, and economic classes. And whether we are going to upgrade this, if there is a requirement, how we are going to upgrade, what is the procedure. And what is the extent of credit facilities that they can provide. We will have to check it. Next, the travel time for the said destinations, how long that they will take. If there are any number of transit. If there are number of transit, what are the facilities available, whether they will provide food, accommodation, and other facilities. What are the amount of weightage, that is a baggage one can carry. If there is additional baggage, what are the costs we will have to incur. Whether they will provide the insurer cover, whether they will provide for the comprehensive insurance cover or the medical cover or the accident cover. Those are the things our group has pointed out.
All right, here, procurement audit, fraud, risk. There's here fraud mitigation, fraud schemes, risk associated with the procurement function, universal indicators of fraud. Anybody else have anything to say about our case? If not, we'll move on. Procurement integrity. Procurement integrity is where all phases of obtaining goods and services are performed honestly, fairly, impartially, legally, and most important here, appropriately transparent. Our case was a good example. There wasn't appropriate transparency, correct? Fraud targets, there's only basically three things that you could do. You could have selection, cost, and quality. Selection of the vendors here, where are we going to do fraud? We can do in the selection, we could actually channel business to a particular supplier, 500cc supplier. The cost, we can say that the cost of the glass is 50 cents, but we charge $2, right? So we can manipulate the cost. In the quality, we could actually make one thing we could use this as an example, and we could deliver something else that's something totally different, a cheaper product. Okay, there's two types of controls, either preventative or detection. And based on the discussions we've had here, it would seem that by auditing, if we're auditing a contract once it's closed, what are we doing? We're doing detection focused on detecting inappropriate events if we look at it after the transaction occurred. Procurement form is least visible and most costly because what? Because it's hidden behind what seemingly legitimate transactions are. So if the procurement file is totally in order, but the goods have been never received, the fraud actually has occurred. It's hidden behind all the documentation being properly organized. Typically involves an employee working with an outsider to defraud his employer through inflated invoices, services not delivered, or contract manipulations, work that has never been done. And if we think about our case study, that's one of the things that I was hoping to hear. Number one here, it says here that the added work to project scope in our case studies. Wouldn't that imply here that the contract is being manipulated? If you see a lot of change orders coming through, wouldn't you want to look at which one of the particular procurement people is causing the change orders? Right? That's contract manipulation. Okay, during project execution, review team, you looked at the minutes of the meetings and found out that the team doesn't know what work is to be accomplished. Couldn't that mean that the work is never done? Could that mean that the contract is being manipulated? That's why we have the picture here. This person is a minor. Here's all the information about procurement. He's going in to look at the data. Again, our little case study was put forth to have applications of contract manipulation, work never done, services not delivered. So who pays? Who pays for the procurement? We talked about this yesterday. We talked about this today. It's the expense of the taxpayers. University apathy, disinterest, lack of ownership. We were talking also during lunch about a particular procurement, and it said lack of ownership. Yesterday we discussed fiduciary responsibility. Fiduciary responsibility, that's ownership. Okay, and what it says here, predictable punishment. Universal indicators here, post-service employment. Post-service employment is one predictable indicator. Excessive urgencies. One of the gentlemen here was talking about excessive urgencies in procurement. If everything is urgent, what does that mean? It could mean that your procurement plan is improperly developed. We talked at lunch also about here interlocking ownership or management. That means that one company may actually be owned by several others. One person can own several companies. Unwarranted praise. Unwarranted praise means that, oh, you did a real good job, but it doesn't actually prove to be the fact. The quality is really not there, not present. Major categories, mischarging, procurement. We'll look at each one of these. Product substitution is always an important one that should be looked at. That's why we talk about specifications, statements of work. If I say provide a particular service, it has to be sufficiently accurate that we agree upon what's going to be delivered. So here, bribery, gratuity, extortion, kickbacks, payment schemes, false claims, inflated claims, multiple claims, refunds, right? What happens when we order something and we return it? We pay for it, we return it. The gentleman here picked up the item about refunds. We also talked a little bit here about, inflated claims, checking prices against what? Published prices, catalog prices, false claims. False claims would be what? If we only do desk audits, if we're only looking at papers rather than going out into the field and examining the items, how would we ever catch a false claim? Corrupt payers routinely offer inappropriate gifts or entertainment. Once the contract is in place, the quality of their product often deteriorates. So we were discussing a little bit at lunch where the product, maybe the first couple of shipments are fine. The third, the fourth, the fifth shipment, the quality of the product actually declines for no given reason. Change in behavior of individuals, corrupt recipients often break rules, direct subordinates to ignore standards and operating procedures. Let's look at the third one first and look back to our case study. In our case study, the third one, corrupt recipients often break rules or direct subordinates to ignore standard operating procedures. So if we look at our case study, we had the case study where the individuals often come back to the program manager and ask for further guidance in our case study. Could that be an indication that the program manager was corrupt? Hello? It might be worth looking at. And it might be worth looking at in more detail and seeing, is it only this one particular contract where they keep asking? Are they asking on all contracts? Are they asking on the contracts that involve this particular supplier or this particular location? Poor or late service is ignored or excused. Product documentation is late or incomplete. Okay. Mischarging, billing employees at higher labor qualified than they're qualified for. This actually comes into looking at qualifications of the people that are doing the work. Double or triple billing for product services not received. How would we find this out? We'd find this out by doing invoice analysis, purchase order analysis, delivery analysis, billing for employees that do not ghost employees. That's only going to happen if you go out into the project and look and say, here's a particular individual. Is he there? Is he not there? Why is he not there? When is he there? Advertising schemes, fraud schemes in advertising. Obscure publications, advertising during holidays, limiting days to advertise. So we only advertise for 3 or 4 days. We have a contract for $50 million. We advertise it for 3 days, and then we award it. So when you look at your procurement file, you might want to compare the time that the ad was put out, how long it was out for, and when it was actually terminated. Product substitutions, defective product schemes, defective manufacturing, knowingly providing a product that was not manufactured as required under the terms of the contract, or substitution. Here, substitution is different than defective manufacturing. Use of untested materials. We looked at when we looked at the letters of credit, it said that there has to be documentation concerning the quality, counterfeit products, failure of contract to perform required tests. These are all indicators that there might be a product substitution. Compliance certificates. Where do the compliance certificates come? Substitution of look-alike goods, movement of inspection tags to uninspected goods. All right, risk management here. Identify risk, assess risk, mitigate risk. Risk is a net negative impact. So procurement risk management. Procurement is one of the major sources of disbursement. Risk associated, there's more risk. Intensive regular audit method is one way to reduce risk. Inherent risk, control risk, we'll look at the different types of risk here. The probability rising out of circumstances from the environment. Control risk is a material error which can be prevented, detected by an internal control. Detection risk, the auditor's procedures will not detect an error that could be material or individual combined with other errors. Factors which increase risk here. The volume and value. There's a high volume, low volume, high value. Value involved. The value involved. Higher the value, the higher the risk. The higher the volume, the higher the risk. Complex situation, segregation. We had, in our case study, we looked at segregation of duties. We indicated what the person keeps going, this project manager that was involved, there's only one project manager. It doesn't say, if you look at the other, if you look at the other case studies, think about here, new staff, turnover staff, weak internal control environment, all right, maladministration, all right, risks associated with the inadequate division of responsibilities between procurement, receiving accounts payable may permit fraud or abuse of the system. If we take the 3 points together from our case study number 6, what does it mean? That procurement is not operating efficiently, effectively, and economically. The fact that there's so much confusion going on might be a function of something negative, correct? Return merchandise, changes to orders, and other adjustment to the vendor obligation may be that there's lacks proper supervisory approval. And we picked that up with the airline ticket, we picked this up with the transportation. I book transportation, I don't actually go on the trip. I get the money back, who's ever gonna know? The accounting record keeping here in a reasonable period. I mentioned several times about looking at old things, looking at the time between transaction, when was the contract initiated, when was the contract completed? So the time periods, looking at the time, processing time is very important. Okay, adjustments to the vendor account may not be properly authorized. Ideally, any kind of authorization for any kind of changes in accounts payable should require 2 signatures, 3 signatures, 4 signatures. How many signatures? At least 2, right? Purchase order information may be incorrect, unauthorized purchase. Employees may be, which they're not, employees may obligate for items they do not have the authority to purchase. Procurement audit trail may be inadequate. And that's one of the benefits of using a letter of credit. A letter of credit actually improves the audit trail, and it does that by engaging, you have the banks are involved. So the bank is acting as an additional internal control factor. Okay, procurement activity may not meet the needs of the government. How do we understand that? We understand that by doing a procurement plan, which actually supports the budget. Okay, the budget and the procurement plan should work together. That's why we talked about procurement plan yesterday. And we also talked about what? We talked about the fact that people should be able to predict what they're going to buy, when they're going to buy it, and why they're going to buy it. And again, going back to our case study, procurement activity may not receive adequate supervisory review. If we look in our case study, there was 3 audit points, and they all came back to one person. The question I would ask is, who controls the project manager in this case? You know, why does the program manager get involved in who watches the program manager? Shouldn't there be 2 program managers? Shouldn't the program manager report to his boss? Planning is staff training, labor relations, conflict of interest. The external environment here, we talk about, we've mentioned a number of times here the Freedom of Information Act. What do they call it here? The Freedom of Information? Public information, where you could file a request. Many times here, the right to information, vendor availability, the complaint, and all the external environment actually controls the internal environment, because people may want to do business with the government because the government is a big procurer of items. Okay, so go. Risk mitigation often has an impact here, the external environment. And often in the United States, oftentimes you find that contracts, if we're bidding on Shamika and I are bidding on a contract separately, I can issue if there's something going wrong, I issue a protest. He doesn't get the business, I don't get the business, but at least the process is reviewed. Basically, there's these 6 elements here. The contract review, prohibition of verbal agreements. You should never do anything verbally. Everything should be in writing, right? There's documentation. Okay, risk mitigation through absence of verbal agreements. Any kind of execution, a specific start date, any kind of pre-activity, documented. The payment process should be separated from the contract management process. Okay, and in contract management here we have what? Transparency and reporting, public perception that they're here. We also talk about performance. One of the indicators in our case study here was that there's things changing, what they call scope, it's called scope creep. I purchase 1 bottle of water, all of a sudden it turns into I'm purchasing not only water, I'm purchasing food, I'm purchasing flowers, so it's expanding the project. That's a good indicator that there's risk management in contract management, risk mitigation. There's a risk in the contract management. Risk analysis chart, this is a typical risk analysis, risk level, extreme, high. You could answer these questions. Was a detailed action present? Extremely, if it was not present. Existence of our internal control policies, procedures structured to reduce risk. The level of audit increases where internal controls are absent. Risk management. So we look at the internal controls to evaluate what the level of risk is. And here, as far as this comes out, let's look at this. The lack of as far as primary internal control weakness is observed in procurement. And this is based on World Bank assessment. And what does it say? Lack of independent audits and checks, 5%. Lack of competent personnel and oversight, 6%. Poor tone at the top. So these 3 elements account for 30% of the risk. Auditors should first identify the high purchasing risks in an organization, then look for the key controls. Pre-numbering of purchase orders, centralized receiving. All items should go through a particular receiving point, common controls. Okay, missing numbers in the purchase order. One of the first things you want to do is account for all purchase order numbers. Look for the numbers that are missing. Okay, multi-level purchase standard. Performance standards against which purchasing performance can be assessed periodically. Matching receipts to purchasing policies. Closing out the purchase order file after payment. As I mentioned earlier today, looking at old outstanding purchase orders is often a good indicator where there's fraud. Internal audit is restricted from full range of assessments in scope, insufficient resources. Internal auditor is not involved in the procurement system here. Prohibited activities for auditors, receiving improper gifts, acting for the auditing. Okay, fine. So, planning phase, solicitation phase, and post-station phase, okay? Identify the needs, communicate the needs, identify the scope, identify the vendor. 20% of total expenditures, communicate government expenditures. Why audit? 55% works, 45% works, 55% goods, and 5% services. Okay. Particular audit here: indications of irregularities or criminal fictitious procurements, low quality goods. Potential red flag delivery is not in the right location here. Red flag number 1, quality received is not according to the requirements. Goods not yet utilized and cannot be utilized. Okay. So if the delivery was supposed to be in Colombo and it ends up in Ratnapura, maybe there's something wrong, right? Or if we've ordered stuff, we go out and we look and we see that it actually hasn't been utilized. It's excess inventory. When you go out and look around the stores, and you see that there's piles and piles and piles of things, you might want to see who actually ordered it in the first place. Okay, here, the INTOSIA here, the ISSA, International Standard Standards for Supreme Audit here. Pre-audit is indispensable. Pre-audit is an indispensable for the sound management of public funds by the Supreme Audit, or by the, it may be carried out by Supreme Audit or other audit institutions, which you're another audit institution, correct? Public Works, this is also part of the INTOSIA. When public works, when auditing public works, the Supreme Audit Institution shall promote the development of suitable standards for regulating the administration of such works. Number 3, audit of public works shall cover not only the regulatory, the correctness of payments, but also the efficiency and quality of construction. Okay, we hear, it's interesting here, whenever public tenders are not invited, the Supreme Audit Institution shall determine the reasons. So if it's a sole source, if they're not put out to tender, the auditor should have an explanation. Why wasn't this put out to tender? All right, here, red flag indicators for procurement planning: markup budget, unrealistic unit prices, direct procurement to brand or supplier, procurement plan is not announced openly. So a red flag: engineering work packages split to avoid tendering. Issues to consider: audit pre-qualification to covered groups, scheduling of available, undertaking of common or joint procurement. Issues to consider during procurement planning. Here's an audit point. An audit point could be that that there was a pre-qualification. We are only going to buy a particular type of paint. The paint has to be from this particular supplier. Scheduling of available resources. We need this next week, and that's going to be an audit point. Here, another red flag indicator, combining one purchasing plan is not according to need, unrealistic time schedules, selecting a wrong method, direct appointment instead of open tender. If we see a direct appointment, again, it has to be justified. We saw that under the International Standards of Auditing, that open tender has to be, everything should be open tendered, nothing should be direct tendered. All right, here, selecting the wrong method. Budget allocation using self-management but carried out by contract. Time scheduling is different, using different times for delivery, different times for procurement, different time frames. Budget support is not available to support the procurement. Items to consider: aggregation of requirement, allocation of biddable lots. A biddable lot is a particular group of items. Am I going, I need 50 plates or 100 plates or 1,000 plates or 10 vehicles or 15 vehicles. So if the biddable lots are too large or too small, is that an indicator of an issue? Okay, is it possible actually to use a framework contract? Framework contract means providing services for entire particular product groups. Can we use a framework contract? Pre-contract phase, typical stages here. So the contract award, let's look at red flags here. Red flag indicators: officials lack procurement expertise, certification and training, processes not open and transparent, non-impartial, preference given to certain groups, okay, in the procurement activity. Basic price, which is not standard prepared in the offer agreement, the owner's estimate or the offer agreement. Estimated price does not comply with regulations. Addition of cost items which are not allowed, okay? Preparation, validation of goods and selection of selection documents. Documents are not actually signed off properly. Evaluation is not clear or available. Incomplete documentation is often an indication of fraud. Main concerns while auditing there is here non-compliance with time limits for advertising, insufficient detail or award criteria, inadequate degree of publicity, advertising, no announcement not in National Procurement Committee required format. Okay, tender announcement is confusing, material is confusing. So these would be items, what? They would be items as far as your audit program. Is there an announcement? Yes or no? Was the announcement in the required format? Yes or no? Was the period sufficient? How long was the period? 7 days, 10 days, 20 days, 30 days, okay? Bid explanation committee, limited information and description, no public participation, pre-meeting minutes not distributed. There was no pre-meeting documentation. Submission and opening of bidding documents, relocation here, submission within a particular timeline without appropriate notice, submission made earlier or without appropriate notice. Opening of bid is postponed without clear reasons, okay? Main concerns, pre-contract positions. Non-compliance with all required information, unlawful discrimination, discriminatory technical specifications, 500cc engine, okay? Compliance with the tendered contract, qualification documents. We look at the qualification documents of the chosen supplier. Why was this particular supplier chosen? Red flag, defective evaluation criteria. Number of tender participants is declining drastically. All right, if the number of participants keeps going down, maybe there's something wrong with the bid evaluation process. People do not want to get involved in bidding. Post-contract stage here, kickoff meeting. We have to look at the kickoff meeting when we start the project. What's involved there? What's the level of partial payments? Are partial payments involved? How are they handled? How are they made? When are they made? How disputes are resolved? All right, startup procedures, compliance with the committed timings. If it says a project is supposed to start up within 10 days after contract award, does it actually occur? Are there any formal startup procedures involved? Do we have any kind of documentation? Is there any price revisions going on? Additional works, that was part of our little case study here. Additional works exceed limits in contract. Okay, we didn't pick up on the fact that, okay, change orders, are they allowed in the contract? Are they not allowed in the contract? No announcement of winner. Winner should be advised to all participants. Public announcement is limited or secret. So when a contract's awarded, it should be publicly announced, okay? Complaints by tender participants. Yeah, it's interesting, if there are no complaints, does that mean there's no complaints, or does that mean that the complaints are suppressed? So if you examine a particular contract file, it might be worth actually contacting the people that lost and asking them, why did you not complain? Because there could be selective responses. Maybe responses that are in the file are not all the responses that were received. All right, to here, the suspicion would be that the tender process is engineered. That means that the tender process is actually set up so that one particular group gets the contract. All right, here. Contract signing, invalid signature, date of performance is later than the date of the contract. Fictitious payments, wrong reporting, no reporting, incomplete reporting. Reporting is not according to regulations. Here, progress payment. Payment in according to physical progress. Is the payment actually being made in accordance with the delivery? That's one thing that you might ask for. You might ask to see has this been reported to the tax authority? Have they actually paid the taxes? Have they remitted the VAT? Okay, here, auditor objectives in reviewing purchasing. We'll look at purchasing. Purchasing function here, performed economically, efficiently, accordance with policies and procedures. Let's look at procedures, no undue influence by vendors. Procurement audit, is the purchasing department organized independently of other functions, or is purchasing department clearly defined? Okay, the purchasing department, favorable purchasing opportunities. Is the purchasing consulted on, we talked about solicited, unsolicited bids. Is there a possibility here that the purchasing department is offered favorable purchasing opportunities? Is there a policy here? Is the approved limits within the written procedures? Are policies regarding capital expenditures? Is there a purchasing policy and order bid is required? Do we have, actually, are there limits? Is there 100,000 rupees, 200,000 rupees? Are there various limits involved? Here, are procedures established how orders will be shipped? Is the order divided among several vendors? Is there an explanation for this procedure document? Are purchase orders pre-numbered? Is the transport charges verified? All right, are procedures governing negotiation, are there negotiation procedures? Are all initial purchase orders made by the purchasing organization? Procedures established so here poor quality are eliminated from dealing. So we don't, we talked here again at the break time, is there a blacklist? There is no blacklist. Are all purchase orders canceled after payment to avoid duplicate payment of the same invoice? Is authorization required to make changes in the purchase order file? Are buyers rotated so they did not deal with the same buyers rotated? Here, special emergency purchase orders. Are there procedures for emergency purchase orders? Are they reviewed on an after-the-fact basis? Cash disbursements. Does the approval process here, are goods received approved prior to payment? Are proper authorizations required prior to payment? Does the accounting distribution include requests for payment? Does the request for payment here include the accounting of expenses? Can changes be made to without approval of management? Travel expenditures monitored to determine they're in line with, do procedures for are periodic audits made of disbursement activities? Fine, great. And we're going to look, the next two slides, or next two sessions here, we'll look at something a little bit more proactive, a little bit more active as far as auditing. And the question I got during the break was, can the auditors influence the vendor, the supplier, the vendors? And that's probably one of the big things with doing procurement auditing. We'll talk now about here vendor management, total quality management, and this ISO quality. And oftentimes, my answer to the question was that doing business with the U.S. government or any government, for example, is that you could actually put policies in effect through procurement. Procurement by the government allows the government to implement certain policies. They also may here put as far as quality. We talk about the Six Sigma quality. So again, this is as far as auditing, we're looking beyond the fact of checking to see, does the purchase order agree with the invoice? Does the invoice agree with the contract? We're looking more here into what could we do, vendor management, and how do we utilize the government's money to actually achieve some policy changes. And it's interesting, next time when we talk about performance auditing, we're going to talk about program budgeting or this whole idea about program budgeting, and the whole idea of program budgeting, project budgeting, actually came from the U.S. government. And during the last Second World War, the Americans were engaged in building defense products, and they developed program management, program budgeting. Six Sigma came basically out of the United States space program when the Americans had a space program. But the reason we're gonna, we want to talk about these today, we're talking about them, is that we could actually hopefully look for opportunities when we do our procurement audits to apply these ideas. We might want to make sure that when we're contracting with a particular supplier, that they actually implement some kind of quality management system, that they have some environmental systems involved. Procurement here, strategic role, policy, as I just got done saying here, the policy implementation, quality of input affects policy implementation quality. So if the projects are implemented poorly, if there isn't then people tend to complain. You can complain about, oh, the government built this road or the government built this flyover, and the citizens are dissatisfied. That reduces their willingness to pay taxes, correct? So poor implementation, poor quality materials results in poor policy implementation. And then, as I say, the question from the break, and I don't know who asked the question, what is vendor ongoing process of third-party providers to ensure that the continually obtains the best value of products. This is vendor management, so that it's continually obtains the best value from the providers and controlling the exposure of vendor-related risks. All right, so what does it mean? It means that we get involved in here. We have relationships with our vendors, we manage the contracts, we see what they're doing internally, okay? Is there anybody, when you go out to look at a procurement organization, is there anybody here that's actually doing vendor management, lifecycle management, that they go through and they qualify, keep the vendors qualified, unqualified? The control here related, the vendor, what is a risk? A risk is what? That we pay money and we obtain nothing, right? We pay money or we obtain low quality goods, or we obtain the wrong quality of goods, or what? We could be involved here in legal issues. There could be issues about complaints with the senior management that we're dealing with the wrong people. Here, governance. What is vendor management? Governance is establish a strategy, and governance defines standard operating procedures, roles, and responsibilities. And we talked about the fact that there are particular rules and regulations already in existence. Are they up to date? We had the observation about the computers. Are the standards and procedures current and up to date? All right, selection of vendors here, formal unbiased practice. Yesterday we talked about how that occurs, selection of vendors. But also one of the things here was contract life cycle. How does it go from establishing a project plan all the way through project realization? It's a complete cycle. And to identify, not only here from acquiring the glass of water, drinking the glass of water, washing the glass, putting the glass, we want to go through the whole cycle, whole delivery cycle. Protect the organization from negative effects that can be caused by events on the vendor side. Who has any ideas? Somebody's got some ideas.
If we have not selected the suitable vendor, there can be a lot of problems. Number one is they may not supply required quantity in time. Right. And number two is they don't supply the item according to the quality.
Okay.
And number three is, again, there can be some legal issues, some default.
All right. Okay, and what's the consequence of the legal issues, and what? Lawyers get involved, you end up spending twice the amount of money or 3 times the amount of money. Okay, go ahead. Correct?
Yeah, there may be additional expenditure that is the entity has to incur.
You have to buy instead, okay, if the delivery is late, Then you have to go out and buy from another source, so that you end up with twice the amount of things instead of the once the amount, correct? So here, this is vendor relation management, maintaining effective relationships with the vendor, ensuring that they're involved and that they know what the plans are. Ensure vendors perform as contracted. How do we ensure vendors perform as contracted?
Payment procedure should be very clear, and on time we want to pay their payments.
Okay, yeah, that the payment schedule, that we have agreements, that the schedules are public, that things are open, that the activity, the TOR is correct. So it all comes back to proper planning. If the planning is open and transparent and available, then we can ensure that they perform according to contract, correct? And if they also know what the bigger picture is, if it's one vendor supplying one particular item, that it's not done in isolation, that there's a number of people involved, okay? And we'll look later on here that there's establishing a quality circle. We'll talk about quality working groups, how to improve quality by engaging all parties. Okay, so here, why is it maximize value and deliver greater outcomes through relationships? Okay, here, supply chain management. So if we're finding issues with the furniture, is it a question that maybe there's something with the supply chain that's wrong? If we're finding something wrong with the computers, it's not necessarily that this particular item doesn't work. Maybe there's something wrong with the process. Here, third-party failures result in impact to the service. The harbor is not finished on time. The road is not finished on time. So what happens if the road isn't finished on time? Tax revenues may go down, correct? Or the railroad, what happens if they don't deliver for the railroad? We don't get a particular piece of equipment for the railroad. We cannot make 2 trains a day. We can only make 1 train a day, okay? So inherent in each one of these should be, even in a government environment, they're very important. Business continuity, the hospitals, inability to provide services. It's very interesting here. Regulatory requirements, it's very interesting now. Sri Lanka is into, it seems, recycling. Recycling is a big matter. Has anybody ever thought through the whole process of recycling? What happens? So we collect all the goods. What do we do with them after we collect them? Here, financial risk, inability, reputation risk is also impacting the organization's brand or reputation. And as when we look at procurement, and this is where we really want to be here, a process approach and risk-based thinking. It's very interesting to, we look at the files, we find out that the invoices are there, the purchase orders are there, and we looked at all that yesterday, but here, define measures of effectiveness and efficiency. How many people, when I used to do project audits or procurement audit, you say, okay, all the papers are in order, but you shake your head and it says, this doesn't really make sense. Why are we going through this process? The picture here, the idea here is a man he's building a bridge. If the objective is to have a better government, a better functioning country, how do we put the pieces of the puzzle, particularly as it is in procurement? All right, the last one, and we'll finish with this. Let's look at this because environmental. Environmental management here, 14,000. There's a 14,001. It means here to minimize harmful effect that it has on its activities. This 14,001 environmental management. And this is the environmental management management review, continual planning. All right, documentation. Have all employees received environmental training and been briefed? Has the corporation communicated to the workforce? Can you show progress here? This ISO. Is there an emergency plan here? Okay. Are procedures up to date and readily available for environment?